Opportunity to have Dan Standridge with us to share from the Word. And my wife and I, a few years ago, had the neat opportunity to go and visit with Dan and his wife Donna in Milan, Italy. And you've spoken, was it 4 years ago, Dan? He was our speaker. I don't know what year it was. He probably doesn't remember. But 4 or so years ago for Missions Conference, Dan was a speaker here, and so many of you got to meet him then if you didn't already know him. But Dan, we're going to just turn it over to you and give you an opportunity to share whatever the Lord's laid on your heart.
I love Octobers in Warsaw, Indiana. When I came for seminary, I tried some odd jobs, but eventually landed on painting houses and hanging wallpaper. And I always looked forward to October, the first freeze. So we couldn't paint houses anymore. And we could go inside and wallpaper. And we had some very fun times, and that's how we paid our way through. I met my wife, Donna, when we drove in yesterday. She said, Dan, this is the town where we fell in love. So it's not bad. And boy, that was a long time ago, and our love is very different now than those early days of excitement and expectations to go to Italy. It was great to have Mike and Marta. I say Marta or Marta in Italian or Spanish. They represented you well. We had a good time. We went to a fast food place in the park that is considered the 5th best restaurant in Milan. I couldn't afford the top ones, but we did the fast food, and it was memorable to be together. So thank you for sending them. Thank you for being our partners and so faithful in so many ways. And we will look forward to giving you some possibilities to be involved with us some more. The title this year, and I look at you, and you've been to so many missions conferences in here, and you know so much about missions, and I don't think I could ever top all the information that you've acquired over the years. But today's, or this week's theme is the changing face of missions, and what has changed and what has not changed. I'm not going to bore you with statistics, but let me say that Americana is not as popular in the world. We haven't won a world war in decades. Our money is often outdone by other ONGs. There are other countries that are sending more missionaries than America. So we have kind of lost that John Wayne strut as we go out in the world and say, hey, I'm here to save you. I'll build a hospital, I'll build a school, I'm here to save you. That doesn't go over very well anymore. And it doesn't go over very well because it's not true. And it probably never went over very well. And I want to explain some things. Don and I are now directors for Europe with other 2 couples. And we get to listen and connect with our missionaries every month via Zoom, organize retreats, listen to them. There's a measure of training, and we hear their stories. And I thought, okay, well then, when I became director about 7 years ago, okay, we're going to fix them. We're going to be just point them in the right direction, make them more efficient, work on their strategy, see what they need from us, just to be very effective with them or for them to be more effective. And I found that is not what missionaries need from a call from a director. They need something very different. We were at headquarters this week, and we listened to some of their stories. For instance, a couple that just came back from Kiev in the Ukraine. 23 years of ministry. I would say effective ministry, who knows? That's what they told us in their prayer letters all these years. And then the war broke out, and their ministry changed. The schools were somewhat disrupted, so they start working with pastors, with families. There's a big question whether Christians should participate in the war or run away. There were pastors that were signing papers to excuse their kids from the war. It was a very complicated time, and they lived in Kiev, went to bed every night with bombs and all the things that you hear about. They were trying to sleep through it. They would go to the front, talk to the soldiers, talk to the widows, the orphans for the last 5 years. And now they're back in America, they're retired. And this missionary was saying, you know, I went to I think it was a hardware store to look for a switch or something. And this guy was going on what switch I needed. And I told him, listen, I just got back from a war zone. You have no idea how little interest I have in this switch. What do you do with that? The changing face of missions is that these missionaries have worked all their life to bridge a gap in their countries. Sometimes things have gone well, sometimes things have kind of deteriorated. So how do you minister to this missionary? What happened to him? There was another lady, a single gal, that told her story. She is in her first term. She's Asian. Her parents immigrated here to North America, and she struggled all her life to become as North American as she could stand it, or she could, to interpret that in terms of fitting here. And then after many years, 10 years of work in the secular world, or whatever that means, she decided to join a mission, an organization, and go and work in the Far East. Not her original country, but she sits there and watches how the Far Easterners deal with missionaries coming to their field, what they hear, what they don't hear. She recognizes so many of the insecurities that her family had when she came to North America, and she tries to be for them and to listen to them and bring the gospel to a culture that is insecure, is far from the gospel, just like her family was when they came to North America. What is she struggling with? How does she need to be helped? We talked to another couple, a family that has just come from a closed country. They can't reveal to us where they were. We know, but they can't say it. Live freely. Their phones are always under control. They went with a large team, and they're the last couple in the city where they went. And they were talking about their reentry. That's what the conference was about, the week was about. And they said, you know, we spent a week with our family. They love us, they support us. But in the whole week, only twice they asked us what we do and what our life is like overseas. And they were very menial questions, and when we started answering them, they kind of lost interest. What were they asking to be heard about? What were they going through that their family did not understand? Sometimes missionaries try to explain what they're going through, the hardships, or what it's like. Sometimes they speak of them in very glamorous terms. Oh, we get to ski in the Alps, or we get to eat original Thai food, or whatever. Sometimes they feel like they have to present the most glamorous part of missions. Sometimes if they mention the sufferings, they sound like they're complaining, and nobody wants to hear people complaining. I don't know if you've ever thought this, but you know, some people say, well, we're sending you so much money and you're not happy there. Why don't you come back? So what is the calling of the missionaries and of a sending church in a world that is changing is not receiving missionaries maybe like they used to. We work in Italy, and if you talk to an Italian long enough, they'll try to convince you that their food is better, that their women are better, that their religion is better, that their sports are better, that their monuments are better. They're going to try to convince you that you have nothing to offer. Well, how do you get somebody like that, and frankly, people all over the world, to listen to you and to listen to your gospel? They will not admire you for having traveled. Of course, if you go to Italy, you're kind of in for all the goodies that they have to offer. So, what can we face and talk about, and how can I encourage you to talk about something that is often missed in the work of missions? Do you have the first verse? Paul in Colossians 1:24, if you want to open your Bibles or just look at the slides, says something very odd, and I want to kind of explain it and maybe give you some illustrations. He says, "Now I rejoice in what was suffered for you, and I fill up in my flesh what is still lacking in regards to Christ's afflictions." Very strange words, but obviously he's saying, folks in Colossians, I have suffered for you. He's not throwing it back in their face, but he's saying that there's an amount of suffering that he has endured to bring the gospel, and he will say that in different ways. He says that he suffered in his flesh what was still lacking in regards to Christ's afflictions. That sounds almost blasphemous. How can you add to the afflictions that Jesus suffered on the cross? After all, Christ said, "It is finished." What is there more to suffer? Well, if you look at the Greek, and I was no great Greek scholar when I was here at Grace, so don't be too impressed. The word for afflictions is different than the terms used to talk about the suffering of Christ on the cross. It refers to a different kind of trouble, of effort that Paul was trying to describe and also invite others to suffer with him. It was meant for a different purpose other than the sacrificial death of Christ. Paul is not suggesting that his suffering as an apostle makes up something lacking in the saving power of Christ's death. The reformers, Christ took upon himself on the cross all the punishment, all the guilt, all the pain of the wrath of God, and his most clear verdict was, "It is finished. It is paid in full." Nobody has to pay for this any longer. And the reformers rediscovered this incredible payment that Jesus performed on the cross, and helped us to enjoy the benefits of a salvation that was paid in full and that we could enjoy because Christ had suffered in our place. Through the centuries, we have explained well how Christ suffered and died for us. And it is for us to believe and rejoice in his work. Okay, so whatever I'm saying from now on, it's not adding or replacing or bettering what Christ has already completed in us. I do believe that the church after the Reformation has somewhat basked in this privilege of Christ's suffering and has missed a ton of verses, phrases, and instructions like this one in Paul that says, for instance, a missionary in some way suffers to bring the gospel to others, and it is done in behalf or for the benefit of people who don't believe. So here we go. Paul describes the call to live out the life of Christ, his death and resurrection in our life, pretty much like Jesus described when he was alive. He spent years and time explaining that he was from God and he was bringing salvation. He also explained that he was the sacrificial Lamb of God that was going to forgive and cancel and wash away the sins of the world. But then in his, for maybe later years, he started explaining how each disciple was going to have to pick up a cross and die. What is that all about? That there was a price to pay, or in order to live the life of Christ, you were going to go through many deaths and resurrections. This is maybe an odd concept, maybe new. I can't explain it in the time we have. But the very life of Christ, the very DNA of the life of Christ is made of death and resurrection. We all want the resurrection part, and we're all promised that if we believe in Christ, we are resurrected with him. That's how we baptize people. We're also looking for the time of our resurrection when we go to heaven, and there'll be great rejoicing in that moment. But what about the here and now? What does it mean to live the life of Christ and his DNA in us, death and resurrection? Next verse in John 12. Listen to these verses. They're known, but I frankly, for years, didn't realize what they could mean and how they applied to our life. I tell you the truth, Jesus said, unless a grain of wheat falls and dies in the ground, it remains a single seed. But if it dies, it yields much fruit. There's something beautiful in nature. Every time a kernel of corn or a soy seed or whatever seed falls into the ground, in some supernatural way, God touches that seed and brings something to life that is more than the seed that died. That happens billions of times throughout the earth. There is something in the life of God and his activity around us that takes seeds that are cast into the ground to die to make them grow and produce much fruit. And so Jesus says, unless a grain of wheat falls and dies in the ground, it remains a single seed. But if it dies, it yields much fruit. So what has to die? How do you commit suicide for Jesus? I always wonder, well, maybe if God asks us to die for him, we should be ready. Fine. But then I found another verse in Luke 9 that says, anyone who tries to keep his life will lose it. And anyone who gives up his life for my sake will find it. So how do you give up your life for Jesus? The word here, and again, I'm not a Greek scholar, you check me out, and I don't want to bore you with, I never bring up the Greek in Italy. Nobody cares, okay? But the word for life here is psyche, which is not bios, the life that we would give up to die biologically for Jesus. It talks about the inner life. What has to die in your inner life that Jesus resurrects? What do you have to lose in your internal workings to be effective for Christ? And anyone who gives up his life, his way of thinking, or his inner life, for my sake will find it. We all have to live with a lot of reasoning and decisions and commitments and priorities. But what if Jesus asked you to give up the way you're wired mentally for his sake, so that he can bring a life, a mindset, a way of thinking that comes from him. I think that this is the real task of missions and the need of the day. I went to Italy as a missionary. I chafed at the bit to go back to Italy. I'm an NK. I am an MK. My mother was Italian. My dad was a long-standing, famous missionary. And I thought I was going to go to Italy because I had all the answers. I knew the Italian. I knew how to cook Italian. I could outdo the Italians. I could out-talk soccer with the Italians. And I could fix what missionaries were doing wrong. And I would see in my lifetime a great revival. The other missionaries had sown the seed, and we were going to come in and just harvest a great fruit. I was very proud and cocky. Well, I come to you, to my home church, 30 years later, and I am a broken man when it comes to my pride, my theories. I even wrote a book on how to plant churches, and I'm so glad I never published it. What has to die? Our pride has to die, our know-it-all. We as Americans have the education, have the money, have the plan, have we walk into places and people can see that we are so sure of ourselves. After all, Jesus had displayed how to enter from the outside. He left his comfort zone to enter a world different than his. Philippians 2:6, very famous. I want to read this verse and somewhat try to think in terms of what a missionary does when he goes to be a servant. Your attitude, and this epistle was written primarily about two retired missionary ladies that were fighting in the church and creating disruption. But the whole church needed to kind of align itself with the mind of Christ. And this is what he says. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, to be flaunted. Hey, I came from God. I have all the answers. I should be able to tell you once and you get it because I am God and you should get this right away. He did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing. What is the need of the day? That a missionary that comes from our beautiful country will make himself close to nothing. Taking the very nature of a servant. You know, there's cultures that when we walk in, any white person is already considered more important. That whatever that person will say in the discussion is just the way it is. I'm going to go further in my notes. We were talking about partnering with nationals. You know that's a big thing. And we were talking about how we need to tone down our intentions, our thoughts, our ideas. I'm an idea person. People would say, hey, what can we do to reach out our neighborhood? And they would look at me, and I had all these great ideas. After 30 years, nobody wants to hear my ideas. And that's just as good. Because that idea person, that role as the guy who comes with the vision and explains it and gets everybody to do it, has pretty much been lost, I'm glad to say. We were talking to an African man who works in Senegal, and he said, what would it take for our people to come and partner with you? And he went off in a direction that really surprised me. He said, well, Just understand that every time a person from our region sees a white person, they think it's a French colonizer, and he's going to kick us around like the French did when they came and took over our region. Well, how do you undo that? How do you undo that? Well, obviously, you take on the very attitude of God where you make yourself nothing, you become a servant, and you become like them. That's why Paul said, I make myself a Jew with the Jews and a Greek with the Greeks. Well, he was criticized for this. He said, Paul, you get too Jewish. You're too Jewish on us here. And then the Jews would say, Paul, you've gone too Greek on us. Because he would make himself, lose himself to serve, to connect with people. And being found in appearance a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even the death of the cross. What is the need of the hour in front of a changing world? It is for men and women to take up a form of suffering where they devote themselves with humility, losing their identity maybe, losing their ways, losing their Americanness to connect. Who's willing to do that? This girl, I said, from the Far East, she had worked all her life to be more as American as possible. And now she finds herself that she has to critique that and become less American, honor the part of her soul that maybe she despised and that she recognizes as what other people despise in the people that she's ministering to. All authentic going towards missions, all going towards your neighbors to bring Jesus, comes with a cost to the messenger. Missions is what happens outside these four walls. Okay? Maybe this week we're going to talk about what goes on outside of these four walls in the far countries of the world. But Jesus said, go into your Jerusalem, Samaria, and then into the extreme parts of the world. When you go out of these four walls and try to connect with unbelieving people, you're going to have to humble yourself. There's a degree of suffering that you're called to bring Jesus to others. In your neighborhoods, in your lunchrooms. Some of you may have children, grown children, that are not walking with the Lord. How do you connect with them? Do you leverage how well you trained them all their life? Or you make yourself humble and start listening to what happened in their hearts and mind? I had a missionary just describe how hard it was to play games one evening with her daughter. They were trying to do the easiest, most banal way to be together. And they couldn't talk about politics. They couldn't talk about religion. They couldn't talk about their work because this daughter was so adamantly against how she was raised. Some of you know what that is like. Well, if you move towards that child with humility, emptying yourself, disrobing of all the rights and all the things that you hoped and the things you like to control in that child, you will be suffering for Jesus. When you go to your neighbor who is a mess and try to be Christ to them, we've often thought that evangelizing our friends is bringing them here to church. That is not true. Evangelizing, or whatever that means, is going where they are and bridging that gap that they don't even know exists. Or they know, but they will never tell us. 3 out of 5 Americans have said they will never darken the walls of a church. So it's our task to go out and suffer something, some disruption, where we just let go of all the entitledness we have, all the Bible verses we know, how easy it is for us to explain the Bible, and listen to what they're doing. Look at how Paul described the going towards. Whatever happens, conduct yourself in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. The gospel of Christ is the life of Jesus that died and resurrected. To me, the way I'm beginning to understand it, being worthy of the gospel is reenacting in front of them death and resurrection. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ not only to believe, that's good, that's what we celebrate and sing about in church, but also to suffer for him, since you are going through the same struggle. 2 Corinthians 2:4, for I wrote you out of great distress and anguish of heart, and with many tears, not to grieve, but to let you know the depth of my love for you. Love includes a level of distress where you go and risk it all to reach the other person. And we have basked and enjoyed and sung about what Christ has done for us, and that has gotten us into heaven, and we're secure in that faith and in that promise. And yet it is to us to die like kernels in the ground so that we will bear much fruit. Galatians 4:19, it says, my dear children, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. You moms, who wants to go through childbirth over and over to birth more kids? I think some of you are done. But what about in a ministry sense, in the metaphor that Paul understood well spiritually, putting himself again and again through the pains of childbearing until Christ could be formed in others? You know how hard it is to pursue somebody and convince them of Jesus as the Son of God, or explain to them that he died for their sins and they can rest in his forgiveness and be saved forever? What about then explaining to them also that the DNA of the life of Christ is death and resurrection? And if they die like a kernel, like you die like a kernel, into the ground, Jesus will put his finger on their life, on your life, and help you to produce more fruit. Suffering for Jesus, and I know that has always been kind of used almost as a joke. Hey, we're suffering for Jesus. We're skiing the Alps, or we're learning the different kinds of cheese in France. Suffering for Jesus. Well, suffering for Jesus may be changing the use of your time, of your schedule. Changing your comfort. Changing the level of your competence in the way you talk about religion and others. It may be changing your love for controlling everything. Sometimes it feels very out of control to go to a different country, to learn a new language. Leaving your home court advantage and play ball in someone else's court. For missionaries, it usually means leaving behind their culture, downplaying their culture, being somewhat belittled for the culture. In Italy, they find tons of things to make fun of us. The way we dress, or we can't dress as elegant as they do. The way we appear, they make fun of our diets. Every country has a way of belittling other countries. We had an Albanian, when they were coming to Italy, hanging on to ships, kind of immigrants. I don't know if you remember those scenes, maybe in the 90s. He sat at our table, he was eating a meal with us and my family, and he said, "Our bread in Albania is so much better than yours." And I'm thinking, why don't you go back to Albania? Okay. I took it in the chin. In a way, it was suffering for Jesus. The Jews had told Moses, the meals in Egypt are so much better than what you're providing us. It's not an odd experience to have people compare to your efforts and say, we were doing just about better without you before you came. Leaving behind their culture, their native language. We had a missionary that came to Italy. He was learning Italian, just having a miserable time with it. And he was sitting in the bus, and a man that had Down syndrome was complaining about something. And he couldn't have compassion in that moment. He didn't care how he felt. He said, "A person with Down syndrome speaks better Italian than me." What was he struggling with? The support network is fine. We as Americans have great mission groups, great organizations. We even have pension plans. Some mission groups even have an allowance to pay off their school debt. We have retreats. We have calls that we make to encourage. We try to bring our missionaries together. We have great supporting churches that are just all over us when we come back. But there's a different kind of support group, or lack of it, when you're overseas. Familiar customs, holidays, living conditions. Italy is pretty good. We're kind of tight. Apartments are small, cars are small. We're not going to have too many guest rooms. If you come and see us, we'll give you our kids' bedrooms or something if we have them. But Italians are pretty tight. So even your personal space and what you think you absolutely need will change. But this is nothing compared to some of the stories I've heard of missionaries in Ukraine, at least in the old days. What they had to do to stand in line for food. I mean, talk about, I can't imagine something weirder and more inconvenient than to stand for hours in the cold for a stick of butter. Okay, what are they doing? Are they just gluttons for butter? They should go without? Or in some crazy way, they are accepting the sufferings to add to the effort of bringing the gospel to the Ukrainians, for instance. Living conditions, sense of competence. Man, you're going to be around people that will work very hard at making you feel dumb. And you're there and can't really protest too much because you're a guest or because you want to connect with them at a different level. How do you enter fully in the realm, in their pace, in their mentality, in their limitations, in their educational restrictions? I'm not saying this to scare anybody away from missions. I'm saying this to invite you to missions. Unless a kernel or a seed falls into the ground and dies, he will not produce much fruit. If you really want to minister, and I have a question for you if you want to write it down. What is the hardship you have incurred in your ministry in order to bring the gospel to new people? they're going to be embarrassed by this question. What are the hardships that you have endured? They'll feel like they can't complain to you. After all, you have sacrificed to send them over. Maybe they think it's not very spiritual, but in every attempt to go out into the world and connect with people that don't know Jesus, there is a measure of suffering. So the question is, what hardships you have incurred in order to bring the gospel to your new people? What dies in you? What has to die? Or what do you disrobe of to be more like them or closer to them? And what is born out of that distress? A lot of my work is to listen to missionaries or Christians in general that have a hard life and provide a glimpse of understanding how hope comes out of distress. If you look in Colossians, Paul starts this phrase, and he says, "Now I rejoice in what was suffered for you." I rejoice in what was suffered for you. All of this that I've talked about produces that spiritual joy, that eternal joy, that would not be expressed, would not surface, would not be a supernatural fruit in your life unless something died. So ask your missionaries, what are the hardships you have incurred in order to bring the gospel to your new people? What dies in you when you live or go into this country? I don't want to hear people say, "Oh, Dan, you're doing such a great job. I'm glad it's you and not me." You should be called to a kind of death in the ground so God can produce a fruit that would never be produced unless something in you died. It used to be said that the normal and only way in which churches would participate to mission was to pray and pay. Well, I'm super thankful for people that pay and pray. American churches are known worldwide for being very generous. Okay? You spend time praying for the missionaries. Nobody's asking you to. You have prayer meetings. You drive all the way out here to the cornfields and pray for missionaries. You believe in some form of sacrifice for the missionary. The American church is very generous, very in tune with this. A couple months ago, we sent a prayer letter and asked for a car. It's kind of complicated to come, buy a car, rent a car. So every year we've asked. For years, Donna's family would provide us a car. For the last 3 trips, returns to home ministries, we've asked for a car. There's a lady in Winona Lake who has let us use her car. She used to have 2 cars. Now she has 1 car. She's letting us use this car all the time. And said, I can make do. I can ask for favors and people will drive me around. That is, to me, a level of suffering that I have hardly seen, that I wouldn't do. I need a car. Everybody needs a car. What if I have an emergency? Do I have to call somebody to take me there? She is more than glad to do it because she's part of her ministry, and her suffering somehow lines up with the effort that Christ did to come on earth. And I know that she is seeing fruit and joy and something very beautiful come out of her soul because she gave up her only car. And this is a lady that is not wealthy. She would be seen as somebody who's had too hard of a life. There is great joy in living out the gospel. He said, I'm doing this with joy. God produces in me a level of gratitude, of privilege, of insight in the work of God that is nothing but joy. An otherworldly joy is born out of my sorrow. When something dies in you this way, and it's something that item or thought or priority is put aside for Jesus, a supernatural fruit will be born. I tried this once. I was getting in a flight, and it was one of those flights where everybody can pick their seat. So there's that jockeying for position in the plane. And I had been thinking about this, and I said, I know what I'm going to do today. I'm going to pick the worst seat on this plane. Well, I don't know anything. I don't know about planes. So I said, I'll put myself at the end of the row and let everybody pick their seat, and then I'll go in and pick whatever seat is left. Not because I'm a martyr, but because I had read verses like, the last shall be first. So it's okay, I'll try to do this experiment. So I went in, and the seat that I found was in the last, from the back seat. And I sat in the middle, of course. Nobody wants middle seats. And I was sitting next to a pilot. He was returning home, and he can't pick the best seat in the plane. So he was sitting in the seat next to me. And I said, well, I see you're here. I'm living out this experiment. Jesus says to be that the last will be first. Do I have the worst seat, or do you have the worst seat? And we talked for a while on that. What is it like to experience a joy that is from another world because you died to something for the sake of others, or to bring the gospel to others? Voluntary suffering like this produces joy, produces love, produces dependency on God, produces humility, a peace that surpasses all understanding, a genuine faith, a genuine hope. So this is how we begin this week. I have one little video that shares my pride and joy. I was hoping to go to Italy and fill out stadiums of Christians coming to hear me or coming to hear the gospel. That has not happened. Then we worked with an Arabic-speaking church, and I thought, this is the key. People were coming to Milan and say, Dan, how are you doing this? We're trying so hard to establish churches in Arabic or with Arabs. How did you do it? And I couldn't really explain it, but I felt pretty good. Maybe I'm going to fill the stadium in a service where I speak and an Arab Christian translates for me. I was ambitious. I had a vision, but I was very proud. Here's my pride and joy. This is Walter. He'll explain some of his story. He was one of the lawyers that I ran into in a Italian fast food cafe lunch break place. And we got talking, and they loved to mock my faith. They were interested somewhat, but they loved to throw all the weird stuff. Long story, but there was one guy that was quite adamant like the others, but every time I would explain or answer, it looked like the Holy Spirit was really touching his heart. And it wasn't through my theological ability, what do they call it, the apologetic know-how. I remember once he said, Dan, what's the story about the serpent talking to a woman? And by God's grace, I said, Walter, what's the story about a fish swallowing a person for 3 days? I didn't want to argue over intellectual possibilities, the science, the proof that they pulled out sailors out of a whale or whatever. But over the years, he came to faith. He's a great believer. He lives 2 hours away from Milan. He only comes into the city for his business, and so we meet every day, and we've been doing this for years. Every time we depart, he says, Dan, if it wasn't for you, I would have never known Jesus. And I can say honestly that I think of you. If it wasn't for you sending me there, this guy would have never heard about Jesus. There is a cost that produces joy. Now he's witnessed his family. His family really despises him. He's a wealthy man. He's a very educated man. They run in circles that I could never run into. I used to sit in those lunches and look at their watches. They all had these super expensive watches. And I'm sitting there with my Timex, and I kind of cover it. Says, man, I don't belong here. His family's like that. His wife suffers with alcoholism. His kids are getting old enough to make fun of him. His son, who's 12 years old, calls him Jesus. Oh, you're Jesus now. Well, that's beautiful. An atheist, an obnoxious lawyer, a very wealthy lawyer, a very cultured lawyer, is now Jesus to his son. So let's watch the video. I'm done. Thank you for listening, but just enjoy Walter, who is in many ways, one of my pride and joys. I have a special treat for you. We're in Milan, where Don and I have been living here for over 30 years. But today I would like to interview a man, a friend that I met 17 years ago in a restaurant where there were several lawyers getting together and spending their lunch break. And we started talking about God, the Bible, and different topics. And over the years, it's been a Bible study, a time of fellowship, and this man, Walter, has come to faith in Jesus Christ. So welcome to Milano, and let's spend a few minutes together. Okay, we found a quiet spot, not too far from the Duomo, and I'm gonna interview Walter. Walter, how long have we known each other?
Noi ci conosciamo dal 2008, quindi ben 17 anni. In quella circostanza io venivo da un sostanziale ateismo. Io lottavo con Daniele per affermare l'incoerenza della Bibbia, o comunque l'impossibilità di credere alle parole contenute nella Bibbia. Daniele in quegli anni fu molto paziente e con grande saggezza attese che la fede maturasse in me.
So, when did you realize that you were coming to Christ? Was there a moment in which you decided to invite him in your life? How did you connect with God through Christ?
Io devo dire che questa è una domanda molto complessa. In questo senso io posso definire la mia conversione in termini di processo. Una cosa posso dire, che le difficoltà personali, esistenziali, familiari che ho incontrato nella vita, in particolare, mi hanno condotto a Gesù.
You were sharing a passage that described some of your faith and growth in the Lord. Read it to us or tell us about it.
In realtà di passi ce ne sarebbero tanti, ma non so perché nel momento in cui ci siamo avvicinati a questa intervista mi è venuto subito, immediatamente in mente questo passo. Stiamo parlando della prima lettera ai Corinzi, capitolo 13, versetto 11. Quando ero bambino parlavo da bambino, pensavo da bambino, ragionavo da bambino. Ma quando sono diventato uomo ho smesso le cose da bambino. Io non posso definirmi uomo ancora, nonostante l'età, però di sicuro non sono passato totalmente al di là dello steccato. Qualche giorno fa, in un momento di totale sconforto, ho chiesto al Signore di darmi un segno quanto della sua presenza, vicinanza contingente oggi.
In particolare cosa è successo?
Io e Daniele eravamo qui vicino e vicino al mio piede si è palesato un piccolo coleottero, un coleottero che non avevo mai visto con quella forma. Non volava via, mi camminava vicino. Qualche ora dopo, quando io ho chiesto al Signore un segno del fatto che Lui mi accudisse nel momento di estrema difficoltà, e ho chinato lo sguardo e per terra ho rivisto lo stesso insetto. La cosa potrebbe finire qui, ma la sera stessa nella mia cucina c'era di nuovo quell'insetto, ma evidentemente non era una coincidenza.
It's amazing that you find God's presence or signs in odd things. You know, 3 bugs in a row like that is quite unusual for Milan, but it's fantastic that you saw God's hand in being with you in 3 different times of the day. Okay, well, let's leave it here. Thank you for listening to this interview and praying for us and being with us. So long. Goodbye.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for sharing with us a practical challenge to die to ourselves and to our egos, and to do so for the sake of the gospel. It was a great challenge. We are going to close our service out this morning with just a song of praise to our Lord and Savior. I'll invite you to stand as we sing, O Church, Arise.
Church, arise and put your armor on. Hear the call of Christ our captain. For now the weak can say that they are strong in the strength that God has given. With shield of faith and belt of truth, we'll stand against the devil's lies. An army bold whose battle cry is love, reaching out to those in darkness. Our call to war, to love the captive soul, but to rage against the captor, and with the sword that makes the wounded whole, we will fight with faith and valor. When faced with trials on every side, we know the outcome is secure, and Christ will have the price for which he died, an inheritance of nations. shine, for the risen sun. Lift your eyes, we are his radiant bride. Arise, O church,
You are dismissed.